The red warning lights started flashing across the huge monitoring station floating near Proxima Base. Officer Relth was having a normal day, checking space communications when suddenly his computer screen exploded with dozens of emergency signals. His 6 alien eyes went wide with shock as he read the messages coming from a distant planet called Kepler-44 to be. The messages were terrifying. Something was attacking the Zilani people who lived there. These weren't ordinary weapons or enemy soldiers. These were strange biomechanical ships that looked half alive and half machine. They were eating everything in their path: trees, animals, buildings, even the ground itself. The Zilani were peaceful people who had never hurt anyone in there. 300 years of being part of the galactic community. Ralph's hands shook as he called his boss. Council Prime Vexstar, you need to see this right now, he said, his voice cracking with fear. The Zilani homeworld is under attack by something we've never seen before. Vexstar rushed to the communications center and looked at the incoming messages. His face turned pale as he watched video footage from the planet's surface. Massive ships that looked like giant metal insects with pulsing organic parts were landing everywhere. They had tentacle-like arms that reached down and literally sucked up everything they touched. Entire forests disappeared in minutes. Cities were being consumed like food. What kind of weapons are those? Vexstar asked, but nobody had answers. The attack was methodical and precise. These biomechanical harvesters didn't seem interested in capturing territory or enslaving people. They just wanted to consume everything organic and turn it into fuel for themselves. It was like watching a swarm of mechanical locusts eating an entire world. Sir, we're getting reports from other systems too, Ralph said, his voice getting quieter. 3 other planets have gone completely silent in the past week, all in the same sector. Vexstar realized this wasn't just an attack on one world. This was something much worse. These creatures were moving from system to system, eating entire planets, and then moving on to the next one. They were like a plague of mechanical death spreading across the galaxy. The Council Prime immediately ordered all available fleets to respond, but the news was devastating. Their military ships were spread across 70 different star systems, doing routine patrols and trade protection. The nearest battle group with enough firepower to fight these harvesters was 18 days away at maximum speed. 18 days, Vexstar repeated, hoping he had heard wrong. Yes, sir. Minimum 18 standard cycles for our fastest ships to reach them. Vexstar looked at the latest reports from Kepler-44b. The planet was already half consumed. At the rate these harvesters were working, the entire Zilani civilization would be wiped out in less than 5 days. Men, women, children, and their entire culture would be nothing but fuel for these mechanical monsters. The realization hit everyone in the room at the same time. They were about to watch an entire species die, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The emergency meeting room was packed with alien leaders from across the galaxy, all talking at once in dozens of different languages. Ambassador This Is stood at the center, her crystal-like body changing colors rapidly, a sure sign she was extremely stressed. Everyone could see the bright red and orange patterns flickering across her skin as she tried to get their attention. Listen to me, she shouted over the chaos. We're running out of time and options. The room finally went quiet when she mentioned something that made everyone freeze in horror. She wanted to contact Earth, the planet that had been locked away from the rest of the galaxy for 20 years. Council Prime Vexstar's jaw dropped so far his alien mandibles nearly touched the floor. Are you completely insane? He said, his voice getting higher with each word. Those humans are the reason we created quarantine protocols in the first place. But Thesis wasn't backing down. She pulled up holographic images showing strange ships moving in the dark spaces between star systems. These weren't normal spacecraft that most civilizations used. They looked rough, patched together, and absolutely deadly. Look at these intelligence reports, she said, pointing at the images. While we've been ignoring them, the humans have been building something incredible. They've turned mining equipment into weapons. They've converted passenger ships into flying fortresses. They've been living in the most dangerous parts of space for 2 decades. The other council members started arguing immediately. Everyone remembered what happened when humans first joined galactic society. Within just a few years, they had spread to hundreds of worlds. But unlike other species who built peaceful colonies, humans built settlements that looked like military bases. They turned cargo ships into warships. They even converted asteroid mining equipment into planet-cracking weapons. They scared us so badly we had to quarantine their entire solar system, complained Counselor Xi, his 4 arms waving frantically. They were too aggressive, too violent, too unpredictable for civilized space. They turned everything into a weapon, added another counselor. Their exploration ships had more firepower than our battleships. Their colonies were built like fortresses, ready for war. Lysis knew all this, but she also knew something else. The intelligence reports from the Sol system showed that humans had not only survived their isolation, but had thrived in it. They had adapted to living in the harshest environments imaginable. The cold, empty void between stars where no other species dared to venture. Yes, they're dangerous, Lysis admitted. Yes, they're unpredictable. Yes, they turn everything into a weapon. But right now, that's exactly what we need. She displayed the latest reports from the Zelani homeworld. The biomechanical harvesters were working faster now, consuming the planet at an accelerating rate. Entire continents were disappearing. Our fleets are too far away, she continued. Our ships are built for exploration and peaceful trade, not for fighting mechanical monsters that eat planets. But the humans, they've been preparing for war in the deepest parts of space for 20 years. The room fell silent as everyone realized the horrible irony. The same qualities that had made humans too dangerous for galactic society might be the only thing that could save them now. Vextar looked around the room at his fellow council members, seeing the same desperate realization in their eyes. There, our only hope, Lysis said quietly, deep in the darkness between star systems, where no sunlight had touched anything for billions of years. The massive ship Iron Resolve drifted silently through space. It had once been a simple mining vessel designed to crack open asteroids and extract precious metals. Now it looked like something completely different, covered in armor plating, bristling with weapons, and scarred by 20 years of surviving in the most dangerous parts of the galaxy. Admiral Kang Hoon stood in the command center, his gray hair showing the years of stress and isolation. The wrinkles around his eyes told stories of watching friends die in the cold vacuum of space, of making impossible decisions when there was no help coming, of learning to call the emptiness between worlds his home. He was studying holographic star charts, planning their next move to a mineral-rich asteroid field. When everything changed, the communication system suddenly crackled to life with an incoming transmission. This wasn't the usual chatter between human ships or reports from mining operations. This was something different, an encrypted signal with Galactic Council. Identification codes that Kang hadn't seen in 2 decades. He sat down slowly in his command chair and activated the message. As he listened to the desperate plea for help, his face showed no emotion. Inside, however, his mind was racing. The same aliens who had locked humanity away like dangerous animals were now begging for help. The same council that had called humans too violent and unpredictable for civilized space was admitting they needed exactly those qualities to survive. Captain Lee. Kong called out to his second-in-command, a woman who had been with him since the early days of exile. Captain Lee Jun looked up from her tactical station, immediately recognizing the tone in her admiral's voice that meant something big was happening. She had served under Kong for 15 years and could read his moods better than anyone. Signal the entire fleet, Kang ordered. All vessels switched to emergency protocols immediately. Lee's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Emergency protocols meant dropping everything and preparing for major combat operations. They hadn't used those protocols in 3 years, not since the last major pirate fleet had tried to raid their mining operations. "Sir, what's the situation?" she asked, but then she saw the Galactic Council codes on the communication screen. Her expression changed from curiosity to something much more complicated, a mixture of anger, bitterness, and disbelief. "Are you serious right now?" Lee said, her voice getting louder. "After everything they did to us, after they called us monsters and locked us out here to die, after they made us into outcasts just because we refused to be helpless victims, now they want our help." Kang understood her anger completely. Every human in the fleet felt the same way. They remembered the humiliation of being branded too dangerous for galactic society. They remembered being forced to choose between giving up their weapons and being exiled to the outer darkness. They remembered watching supply ships stop coming, forcing them to learn how to survive on their own. But Kang also remembered something else, what it meant to be human. He walked to the observation window and looked out at the stars that had become their home. "Lee, do you know what the difference is between us and them?" "What, sir?" "When people are in trouble, we don't ask if they deserve our help. We just help them." Within hours of Admiral Kong's call, something amazing started happening across the outer edges of human space. Ships that had been scattered across hundreds of light years began moving toward home. These weren't military vessels responding to orders. These were families, workers, and explorers who had heard that humanity was needed again. Captain Park Soo was the first to respond. She had been leading a convoy of 3 converted colony ships near the Centauri asteroid belt when the message reached her. Her ships looked nothing like the sleek passenger vessels they had once been. 20 years of living in deep space had transformed them into something that looked more like flying cities covered in armor plating and weapon systems. "All ships, change course for Sol System," Park announced to her convoy. "Maximum burn. Our people are calling." Her flagship New Dawn had originally been designed to carry 10,000 colonists to new worlds. Now it housed mining equipment, weapons factories, and enough supplies to survive years without resupply. The hull was covered in scars from asteroid impacts, pirate attacks, and the general wear of living in the harshest environment known to humanity, the empty void between stars. From another direction came Commander Kim Da aboard the exploration vessel Voidwalker. Her ship was smaller but packed with experimental technology that no government lab had ever imagined. When you're living in exile with limited resources, you learn to make impossible things work. Her crew had developed gravity manipulators that could crush asteroids into dust, or create artificial gravity wells that could trap enemy ships. "This is Voidwalker responding to fleet recall," Kim transmitted. "We're 3 days out from rendezvous point. Fair warning, we've got some new toys that might surprise everyone." Captain Cho Min brought perhaps the most impressive sight of all. His mining platforms had been converted into mobile fortresses that looked like mechanical spiders crawling through space. Each platform was the size of a small city, bristling with mining lasers that could cut through battleship armor. Equipped with shields designed to survive solar flares, and crewed by people who had spent decades learning to fight in the most dangerous environments imaginable. "Mining Platform 7 reporting for duty," Cho announced as his fleet approached Jupiter. "We've been practicing on pirates and hostile aliens for 20 years. Time to show the galaxy what we've learned." Ship after ship arrived at the meeting point near Jupiter's frozen moons. Cargo haulers that had been converted into troop transports. Scientific vessels now armed with experimental weapons. Even passenger ships had been transformed into support craft, capable of resupplying a fleet during extended combat operations. Admiral Kong stood on the bridge of Iron Resolve, watching the tactical display as his people came home. Each ship represented a story of survival, adaptation, and innovation. These crews had learned to fix impossible problems with limited resources. They had turned mining equipment into weapon systems. They had converted civilian ships into warships that could operate for months without support. Captain Lee looked at her display screen, showing all 47 vessels, now assembled in formation. Admiral, I've never seen anything like this fleet. Half of these ships shouldn't even be able to function according to standard engineering principles. Kong smiled for the first time in weeks. That's because we stopped following standard principles. 20 years ago, we learned to make the impossible work because we had no choice. The massive shadow of Jupiter provided perfect cover as 47 human ships arranged themselves in a loose formation that would have made any military academy instructor shake their head in disbelief. These vessels looked like they had been assembled in a junkyard by people who had never seen a proper warship blueprint. Cargo containers had been welded onto mining platforms. Colony ships bristled with weapon systems that had originally been designed to crack asteroids. Transport vessels were covered in armor plating that looked like it had been salvaged from 100 different sources. But there was something impressive about this ragtag fleet that went beyond appearances. Every ship radiated a sense of competence, an experience that could only come from decades of surviving in the most hostile environment known to humanity, the empty void of deep space, where help was never coming and mistakes meant death. Dr. Yoon Na appeared as a hologram in the center of the formation, visible to all 47 ship captains simultaneously. She had been the fleet's chief engineer since the early days of exile, and her reputation for solving impossible problems was legendary among the scattered human communities. "Welcome home, everyone," she began, her voice carrying the weight of 20 years of shared hardship. "I know you're all wondering what we're up against and how we're supposed to fight. Biomechanical harvesters that can eat entire planets." The holographic display behind her showed technical readouts from the alien ships that had attacked the Zalani homeworld. The numbers were terrifying: vessels larger than anything humanity had ever built, weapons that could strip the surface off a planet, and coordination systems that allowed hundreds of ships to work together like a single organism. "Here's the thing," Dr. Yoon continued. "While the rest of the galaxy has been building prettier ships and more comfortable space stations, we've been learning to survive where nothing should be able to live. Our radiation shielding isn't just protection, it's armor plating that can stop weapons fire. Our mining lasers weren't designed for combat, but they can slice through the hull of any battleship ever built." She gestured to another display showing a gravity manipulator system that had been salvaged from an asteroid mining operation and converted into something much more dangerous. "And these gravity manipulators that we use to move asteroids around, well, it turns out they work just as well on enemy ships. We can create artificial gravity wells, crush hull plating, or even tear a vessel apart by manipulating the gravitational forces around it." The ship captains listening to this briefing began to smile as they realized what Dr. Yoon was telling them. All the industrial equipment they had been using to survive in exile could be turned into weapons that no traditional military force would ever expect. "But here's the best part," Dr. Yoon said, her own smile becoming somewhat sinister. "We've learned to weaponize industrial accidents. You know, all those dangerous situations. We've learned to handle reactor overloads, containment failures, gravitational anomalies. Well, those same accidents can be very useful when you want to destroy something." Admiral Kong took over the briefing, his weathered face serious as he addressed his captains. "Listen carefully, everyone. We're not a military fleet, and we're not going to pretend to be one. We're miners, cargo haulers, colony ship operators, and deep space explorers. That's exactly how we're going to fight." The moment had finally arrived. Admiral Kang gave the order that would change everything. "All ships, maximum burn. Take us to Kepler 44 to be." 47 human vessels roared to life simultaneously, their engines pushing far beyond what the original manufacturers had ever intended. These weren't pampered military ships that returned to comfortable space stations for regular maintenance. These were working vessels that had been pushed to their limits every single day for 20 years. Crewed by people who understood that sometimes you had to break the rules to survive. Captain Park's massive colony ship New Sol took the lead position, its hull vibrating as the engine strained against the ship's enormous mass. What had once been passenger compartments and cargo bays had been completely transformed. Now they housed dozens of small fighter craft that had been built from converted mining drones, each one piloted by crews who had learned to navigate asteroid fields in the dark. All fighters secured for transit, Park reported to the fleet. We'll be ready to launch the moment we drop out of hyperspace. Behind her, Captain Kim's exploration vessel Pathfinder was running tests on its experimental weapon systems. As they passed through an asteroid field on their way out of the Sol system, Kim decided to give everyone a demonstration of what 20 years of innovation had produced. "Watch this," she announced over the fleet communication channel. Her gravity manipulators activated, creating invisible forces that reached out and grabbed a house-sized asteroid. The rock began to compress under artificial gravity that was thousands of times stronger than Earth normal. Within seconds, the solid asteroid had been crushed into a cloud of crystallized debris that sparkled like deadly diamonds in the starlight. "That's what happens when you learn to weaponize mining equipment," Kim said with satisfaction. The fleet pushed deeper into space, leaving the familiar territory of human civilization behind. On the flagship Iron Resolve, Navigation Officer Limso was calculating their arrival time and fuel consumption with the precision of someone who had spent decades making impossible journeys work. "Admiral, I'm showing 18 standard cycles to reach the target system," she reported, her voice carrying a note of concern that everyone on the bridge could hear. "At this burn rate, we'll arrive with less than 10% fuel reserves across the fleet." Admiral Kang studied the tactical display, understanding immediately what those numbers meant. They were committing everything to this one battle. There would be no fuel for extended maneuvering, no reserves for a fighting retreat, no possibility of running away if things went badly. "So we win or we die out there," Captain Lee said quietly. "That's right," Kang confirmed. "Signal all ships. I want every crew to understand exactly what we're doing. We're going to arrive at that system with barely enough fuel to fight. We won't have enough to come home unless we capture enemy fuel supplies or find another way to resupply." The message went out across the fleet, and the response was immediate and unanimous. Not a single captain requested permission to turn back. These were people who had chosen exile over surrender 20 years ago, and that determination hadn't changed. As the human fleet raced through the darkness toward a battle that would determine the fate of an entire civilization, something remarkable happened. The stars outside their viewports no longer looked cold and hostile. After 2 decades of calling the void home, humanity had learned to see the emptiness between worlds as familiar territory. They were coming home to war. The moment the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace, every person on every ship fell completely silent. What they saw in front of them was beyond anything their worst nightmares could have imagined. The planet Kepler 44b, which should have been a beautiful green world covered in forests and oceans, now looked like a half-eaten apple floating in space. Massive chunks of the planet's surface were simply gone, leaving behind raw scars that went down to the molten core. Where there had once been continents covered in cities and farmland, now there were only geometric patterns of destruction that showed exactly how methodically these biomechanical harvesters worked. "Sweet Jesus," Captain Lee whispered from her position at the tactical station. Her hands were shaking as she counted the enemy vessels on her display screen. "Admiral, I'm reading over 300 hostile contacts. These things are huge. Some of them are larger than our biggest mining platforms." The biomechanical ships didn't look like anything any human had ever seen before. They were a horrifying mixture of organic tissue and mechanical components, like giant mechanical spiders crossed with living creatures. Tentacle-like appendages reached down to the planet's surface, sucking up everything they touched and feeding it back into pulsing organic chambers that glowed with sickly bioluminescent light. Admiral Kong forced himself to study the enemy formation, with the cold calculation of someone who had survived 20 years of impossible situations. His experienced eye quickly identified something that gave him hope. "Look at how they're positioned," he said to his bridge crew. "They're not arranged for battle. They're arranged for maximum efficiency in stripping the planet. They're treating this like an industrial operation, not a military engagement." This was exactly the kind of tactical mistake that humanity had learned to exploit during their years of fighting pirates and hostile aliens in the outer reaches of space. The biomechanical harvesters were clearly intelligent, but they had never faced an enemy that refused to follow predictable patterns. "All ships, Formation Chaos 7. Kong ordered over the fleet communication system. Immediately, the tight human formation exploded into what looked like complete disorder. Ships scattered in dozens of different directions, each captain following tactics that had been developed through years of surviving in environments where following the rules meant death. Some ships dove toward the planet's surface, others climbed toward higher orbits, and still others began weaving unpredictable courses that would confuse any targeting system. Captain Park's massive colony ship New Sol led the first attack wave, charging straight toward the center of the harvester formation like a massive battering ram. Her shields flared brilliant blue as they absorbed incoming fire from organic weapons that shot streams of corrosive acid and swarms of mechanical parasites. "All fighters, launch now," Park commanded as her ship punched through the first line of harvesters. Dozens of small craft erupted from New Sol's converted cargo bays, mining drones that had been rebuilt as fighters, each one piloted by crews who had learned to navigate asteroid fields in complete darkness. They swarmed around the larger harvester ships like angry hornets, their industrial cutting tools slicing through organic hull material that had never been designed to withstand focused attacks. Behind Park's charge, Captain Kim's exploration vessel Pathfinder demonstrated the devastating potential of weaponized industrial equipment. Her gravity manipulators reached out and grabbed a harvester ship that was easily 10 times her size, then began crushing it like an empty can. "Target destroyed," Kim reported with grim satisfaction. "These things have strong organic components, but they can't handle having their molecular structure compressed beyond normal parameters." The battle had been raging for 3 hours when Admiral Kang finally understood how these biomechanical monsters really worked. From his position on the bridge of Iron Resolve, he watched the tactical display and noticed something that changed everything. "Captain Lee, look at this pattern," he said, pointing to the screen. "These smaller harvesters aren't thinking for themselves. Watch how they move. They're all responding to signals from those massive ships in the center of their formation." Lee studied the display, and her eyes widened with understanding. The huge biomechanical vessels weren't just harvesters, they were command centers, controlling dozens of smaller ships like a hive mind. Every time one of the massive command ships gave an order, waves of smaller vessels would respond in perfect coordination. "It's like a queen bee controlling worker bees," Lee realized. "Take out the command ships, and the rest should lose their coordination." "Exactly," Kong said, then opened communications to the entire human fleet. "All ships, new priority targets. Those massive vessels in the center aren't just harvesters, they're the brains of this operation. Take them down and we break their entire system." The response was immediate and devastating. The human fleet abandoned all pretense of military formations and began fighting like what they truly were, independent operators, who had survived 20 years in the most dangerous parts of space by thinking outside the box. Captain chose mining. Platform Stonebreaker made a move that would have been impossible for any traditional warship. Instead of using weapons to attack a command node from a distance, Cho piloted his massive industrial platform directly alongside the biomechanical vessel. His mining claws, enormous mechanical arms designed to crack apart asteroids, reached out and physically grabbed the enemy ship. Hull breach in Section 7 through 12, reported Cho's engineering officer, as organic acid from the harvester began eating through their armor. Emergency foam is holding, but we can't maintain this for long. Don't need long, Seo replied, grimly as his mining claws began tearing the command ship apart, like opening a can. Just need to rip out whatever passes for a brain in this thing. Sparks and organic fluids sprayed into space as the massive mining claws did exactly what they had been designed to do, break apart large objects into smaller pieces. Within minutes, the command node was reduced to floating debris. Captain Park coordinated an even more dramatic attack. 3 of her colony ships, New Seoul, Busan Hope, and Daegu Rising, formed up in a triangle formation and accelerated directly toward another command node. These ships had been built with reinforced hulls designed to survive impacts with asteroids during emergency landings on hostile worlds. All ships, maximum ram speed, Park ordered. We're going to show these things what happens when you mess with human colonies. The 3 massive vessels slammed into the biomechanical command ship simultaneously from different angles. The impact sent shockwaves through space that could be felt by ships dozens of kilometers away. When the debris cloud cleared, both the enemy command node and one of the human colony ships were gone. As the command networks began falling one by one, something remarkable happened. The smaller harvester ships that had been moving with perfect precision suddenly began acting like confused individual creatures. Without their central coordination, they started bumping into each other, firing at empty space, and making the kind of tactical mistakes that humanity had learned to exploit. Admiral, they're breaking apart, Captain Lee reported, unable to hide the excitement in her voice. Look at the tactical display. Their formations are completely dissolving. They're running in all directions. But the victory was not without cost. 23 human ships had been destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Crews who had survived 2 decades of exile in the coldest, most hostile environment known to humanity had finally found their war among the stars, and many would not be coming home. The final command node died in a brilliant explosion that lit up the darkness of space like a dying star. Biomechanical fluid and metallic debris scattered in all directions as the last harvester brain was destroyed. Admiral Kang watched from the bridge of iron resolve as something incredible happened across the battlefield. All around them, the remaining harvester ships simply stopped fighting, without their command nodes telling them what to do. These biomechanical creatures became as helpless as abandoned mining equipment. They drifted through space like empty shells, their organic components slowly shutting down without central coordination. Admiral, we're getting reports from all sectors, Captain Lee announced, her voice filled with exhausted relief. The harvester fleet is completely disabled. They're just floating dead in space now. But even before the last enemy ship had powered down, the human fleet was already moving to the next phase of their mission. Captain Park's remaining colony ships were deploying toward the partially consumed planet, their cargo bays opening to reveal medical supplies and emergency shelters that had been prepared during the journey. All rescue teams, begin surface operations, Park commanded. We've got maybe 1 million Zilani civilians still alive down there, and they're going to need everything we can give them. This was what humanity did best, and what the galaxy had never understood about them. Yes, humans could be incredibly violent and dangerous when threatened, but the same drive that made them deadly warriors also made them the first to run toward danger when people needed help. Within hours, human crews were working alongside Zilani survivors to establish refugee camps, distribute food and medical supplies, and begin the massive task of evacuating civilians from the dying world. The same organizational skills that had allowed humanity to survive 20 years in exile were now being used to save an entire alien civilization It was during this rescue operation that the Galactic Council finally arrived. A fleet of sleek council vessels dropped out of hyperspace, their pristine hulls and perfect formations looking almost absurd next to the battered, improvised human fleet that had actually won the battle. Council Prime Vexstar's flagship Unity approached Admiral Kong's command ship, and within an hour, the alien leader was standing on the bridge of Iron Resolve. The contrast between them could not have been more obvious. Vexstar, in his ceremonial robes, standing in a command center that looked like it had been built in a junkyard by people who prioritized function over appearance. "You actually came," Vexstar said quietly, his alien features showing emotions that were difficult for humans to read, but clearly carried the weight of 20 years of regret. "After everything we did to your people, you still answered our call for help." "Admiral." Kong looked up from a data pad showing refugee evacuation statistics. His face was weathered by decades of living in space, marked by scars from battles with pirates and hostile environments, aged by the stress of keeping his people alive in the most dangerous parts of the galaxy. "What did you expect?" Kang asked. "Simply, we're human. When people are dying, we don't stop to ask whether they deserve our help. We just help them." As news of the battle began spreading across galactic communication networks, something remarkable started happening. The story that had been told about humanity for 20 years began to change. They had been labeled as dangerous Deathworlders who were too violent and unpredictable for civilized space. Now that same reputation was being rewritten. The dangerous humans hadn't spent 20 years plotting revenge or building an invasion fleet. They had become something the galaxy desperately needed, but had never recognized: guardians who could thrive in the spaces between stars, protectors who would answer the call for help even from those who had wronged them. Vexstar watched human crews coordinating with alien refugees, sharing food and medical supplies with people they had never met before, risking their lives to save civilians from a dying world. "Perhaps it's time we discussed bringing humanity back into galactic society," he said quietly. Admiral Kang smiled grimly and gestured toward his fleet, 24 battered ships, that had somehow defeated an enemy that had consumed entire star systems. "We never left galactic society," he replied. "We just learned to live in the parts where others are afraid to go."